Ryan Nembhard is one of the best passers in the entire country, and he is primed to have his All-American season with the Zags.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, get started at FanDuel with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All right, we are continuing our player preview series, getting you all ready for the upcoming Gonzaga basketball season. We're talking about every player on the roster, their history, how they ended up here in Spokane. We're also talking about their best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season. Closing out the show, talking about their expected role, expected production, whether they have a future here at Gonzaga, whether they have a future in the NBA, all that to close out the show. We talked Ben Gregg about a week ago. We talked Dusty Stromer and Michael Ajayi earlier this week, our third player preview of the week as we try to hammer these out before the season begins. Today, we're talking about the vet, the old head, the senior, Ryan Nembhard in the backcourt. We're going to talk about his history here. Nembhard, like his brother Andrew, did not begin his college basketball career in Spokane with the Zags. Ryan actually committed to Creighton, where he spent the first 2 years of his career. He was a four-star point guard out of Montverde Academy, the same high school that that his brother Andrew played at before Andrew went to Florida and then transferred to Gonzaga and, of course, spent two fantastic years with the Bulldogs. Nembhard was the 69th ranked prospect in the 2021 class. Committed to Creighton back in June of 2020, and he started right away as a freshman for Coach McDermott's team. He was an instant contributor 2021-22 season, 27 games for him. He got injured towards the end of the season and ultimately missed the rest of the year after February 23rd, I think was his last game with Creighton as a freshman. But in those 27 games, made 27 starts. He played 34.8 minutes per game. And I think it's important to highlight the amount of minutes that Ryan Nembhard has played through his career. As a true freshman, Nembhard played just under 35 minutes a night. There was a lot of conversation last year about how much playing time Ryan Nembhard was getting. And yes, there were games where he and Hickman looked fatigued at the end of the game, and it seemed to be problematic for the program. But Nembhard is used to this. This is what he did as a how many true freshmen at Gonzaga have played 35 minutes a game? It is not something you see very often. In that freshman year, Nembhard averaged about 11 points, 4.5 assists, 3 boards, and 1.3 steals. He shot about 45.5% on two-pointers and was 31.1% from three. That was on about 4 attempts per game, so did not begin his college basketball career as a particularly good three-point shooter. But he was even better as a sophomore. He comes back from that injury, returned for Greg McDermott's team in that 22-23 season, made 37 starts for Creighton, played 34 minutes a game, 34.0. That is the lowest minutes per game that Ryan Nembhard has played in his Gonzaga or in his college basketball career. Spoiler alert, probably going to remain the lowest percentage or the lowest amount of minutes that he plays in a season. I expect him to play more than that this year. As a sophomore, Nembhard averaged 12 points, 4.8 assists, 4 boards, 0.7 steals, shot improved as a 2-point scorer, 48.2% there. Also improved as a 3-point shooter, career best 35.6% from 3 as a sophomore on 4 attempts per game. He had some tremendous performances, most notably a 30-point outburst against the Baylor Bears in the round of 32 of the NCAA tournament. Really got a lot of attention for that outstanding performance. 10 of 10 from the free throw line, was just an absolute hellraiser in the pick and roll. Baylor did not know what to do with him in that contest. After the season, which ends with a very close loss to San Diego State in that NCAA tournament Elite Eight game, Nembhard's a surprise entrance into the transfer portal. I remember being at the parking lot of a Fred Meyer when I saw that Ryan Nembhard entered the transfer portal, and I was stunned at that point immediately, instantly. Everybody was connecting him to Tommy Lloyd and the Arizona Wildcats. If you were around following the team at this time, you remember everybody was just dead set. He's going to Arizona. Andrew was recruited by Tommy. This is what the talking points were to come to Gonzaga. So obviously Ryan's going to go to Arizona instead of going to Gonzaga. Everybody was convinced of this. They were all wrong. Ryan ends up committing to Gonzaga the same day as Graham Ike. Both of them decide they're taking their talents to Spokane, Washington for the 2023-24 season. And we saw Ryan Nembhard have a fairly up and down first season in Spokane. And it kind of mirrors so many of the conversations we've already had outside of the Michael Ajayi conversation, which was different. For Ben Gregg and Dusty Stromer, both of them had a very similar trajectory last year where they flipped their spot in the starting lineup. So that was a big part of this conversation. How they looked in the first half, Ben as a reserve, Dusty as a starter, and then flipped in the second half. Honestly, that tipping point, that Santa Clara loss, is a pretty good dividing line for Ryan Nembhard as well. We're actually going to divide it a little sooner than that, his non-conference performance and his conference slate. For starters, Nembhard finished the season 35 games, 35 starts, a career high 35.8 minutes per game. That's a lot. That's a lot. I said he was used to it because he played over 34 a game in his first 2 years, but just about 36 per game. That's a lot of minutes for anybody to play at the collegiate level. He averaged 12.6 points, 6.9 assists, 4 boards, 1.2 steals. All of those are career highs except the steals, which he was 1.3 as a freshman, so very close. He shot 49.6% on two-pointers. That's also a career high. And then he shot 32.1% from 3.1 attempts per game. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the three-point shooting, because that was the biggest storyline for Ryan Nembhard last season. In the non-conference portion of the season, excluding the Kentucky game, the first 13 games of the year, on 3.1 attempts per game, Ryan Nembhard shot 15%. That is shockingly bad, astonishingly bad. 3.1 attempts per game, he averaged making a half a three a game. Tremendously not good three-point shooting from Ryan Nembhard. We talked about it a bunch on the show. It was a huge problem. It forced Gonzaga to not be able to run their pick-and-roll offense, which we knew Nembhard was so good at because teams could just go under on the screens and force him to shoot. It was a significant problem for Gonzaga. Here's the thing. It got a lot better. And not just like, oh, he got back to respectable levels. For the rest of the season, the final 22 games, on the same number of attempts, 3.1 attempts per game, Ryan Nembhard shot 42% from three. 42%. Yes, it ended up kind of just being a regression to the mean of sorts. Finished the season at 32%. So, about a little worse than he was as a sophomore, a little better than he was as a freshman. It kind of looks just so like it landed somewhere in the middle, but there's a really big difference between how he shot at the beginning of the season and how he shot at the end of the season. Oh, by the way, he also, in those final 22 games, averaged 12.8 points, 7.7 assists, and just 2 turnovers per game. And in fact, in his final 12 games for Gonzaga last year, starting with the Kentucky game, going through the rest of the regular season, into the WCC tournament, into the NCAA tournament, in those 12 games, Ryan Nembhard averaged 13 points, 9.2 assists, and 4.5 rebounds. To average nearly a double-double in points and assists over a 12-game stretch is obscene. He was on an absolute island, just another level completely in his performance down the stretch last year as a distributor, as a scorer, as a shooter. Incredible stuff from Nembhard. I'd also like to point out that Nembhard went from averaging 4.8 assists and 2.1 turnovers as a sophomore at Creighton to averaging 6.9 assists and 2.3 turnovers as a junior. To average 2.1 more assists per game and just 0.2 more turnovers, that's insane. I've seen Creighton fans who were upset about Nembhard leaving, who are drinking the copium, talking about Stephen Ashworth, their new point guard. A lot of the criticisms people had of Nembhard was how much he turned the basketball over at Creighton. Folks, he didn't do that at Gonzaga. 2.3 turnovers per game when averaging 7 assists. Really good stuff. So what does that mean for Nembhard's senior season, his second year in Spokane, his 4th year of college basketball? Is he a strong candidate to be WCC Player of the Year? Could Ryan Nembhard be an All-American in his final go-round of college hoops? We're going to talk about all that and what it would mean for the Zags this season coming up in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about our new sponsor, ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. And pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you're going to feel your best the next day. Here's how to use Z-Biotics. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. You all know the deal with that. Step 3, enjoy your next day. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. And go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and you'll learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use code LockedOnCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. Today's episode is also sponsored by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. We often talk about national championship odds. Today, let's talk Wooden Award. Graham Ike, best odds among Gonzaga players to win the Wooden Award, plus 4,000. Ryan Nembhard, we're talking about him right now. We're going to talk about his best case scenarios this year. He's at plus 10,000 to take home the Wooden Award. Third for the Zags is Caleb Battle at plus 17,000. Pretty good odds right there. If you want to toss $5 down, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, whether you win or lose. Folks, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked on Zags podcast. And we're still going through our player preview episode here, talking about Gonzaga point guard Ryan Nembhard. As a reminder, for those of you who have not listened to the first 3 episodes or didn't check these out last year, this is how we do them. The best case, worst case scenarios are always within reason and without injury. If a player's best case scenario is that they win the Wooden Award, we're going to talk about it. If that's not their best case scenario, we're not going to talk about it. It's everybody's best case scenarios, their first pick in the draft, that kind of stuff, but it's not realistic for everybody. And the worst case scenario, we're not going to discuss a player getting an injury and missing the year. If injuries are a part of a player's history and are relevant, we will discuss them then. Otherwise, we're going to talk about what might actually happen on the court. Ryan Nembhard, the best case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that he leads the country in assists, that he's the best point guard in the country. It's going to be hard to move the narratives around guys like Mark Sears and RJ Davis at North Carolina and Caleb Love at Arizona, and even guys like Hunter Salas at Wake Forest or Jeremy Roach, who's now at Baylor. There's a lot of great guards in college basketball this upcoming season, but in the best case scenario, Ryan Nembhard is the guy with the best statistical performance. Probably not the leading scorer among guards, but he's got the most assists in the country. Again, a guy who averaged 9 assists in the last 12 games last year, very plausible that he is the country's leading assist man this season. The best case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that 12-game sample that we saw last year, 13 points, 9.2 assists, good turnover numbers, shooting over 37% from 3. That's who we see for a full season. The best case scenario for Ryan Nembhard effectively is that consistency issues we saw last year, particularly in the first part of the season when he was a new point guard, adjusting to a new team, a new system, new teammates, because he doesn't have to do that this year, he is the version of Ryan Nembhard we saw at the end of the year throughout the season. The best case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that he averages 13 points, 8+ assists, under 2.5 turnovers per game. Maybe 14, 15 points per game. Again, I think Ryan Nembhard's not going to be an 18, 20 point per game scorer because that's not the way Gonzaga's system is designed. The ball's going to Graham Ike so much that it's probably not going to result in Nembhard being that kind of scorer. So while the best case scenario for him statistically might be to score more, I think the best case scenario in a likely perspective is more like 13, 14 points a game, but huge assist numbers, low turnover numbers. And then, of course, the outside shooting is more consistent. No big lulls. No 13-game stretch where he shoots 15% from 3. 40% for a full season is the absolute best case scenario. Again, he shot 42% in a 12-game sample last year. More like 37, 38%, I think is more likely. We'll get to that to close out the show. But for the best case scenario, Ryan Nembhard shoots 40% from 3, 52, 53% from 2. He averages 8+ assists per game. Gonzaga's pick and roll game is just lethal because he can shoot. They can't go under on the screens. He can get to the rim. He's putting pressure there. He's getting to the free throw line. And the rest of Gonzaga's offense is absolutely humming along with floor spacers, with rim pressure guys like Caleb Battle. And the pick and roll is just an elite part of Gonzaga's system every single time down the floor, and defenses really struggle to defend it. The best case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that he is WCC Player of the Year and that he is a first-team All-American. WCC Player of the Year I don't think it's a stretch. I don't think it's a stretch at all. He was in that conversation last year alongside Graham Ike and, of course, Augustus Marcelonis, who ended up winning the award. This year, Nembhard and Ike are back. Marcelonis is back. There's some other strong candidates, but there's no reason to believe Ryan Nembhard cannot be WCC Player of the Year. First team All-American is certainly the top end with those other guards, like we mentioned, Sears at Alabama, Davis at North Carolina, and some of the other guards, Roach, Salas, etc. But it's not out of the question. Being an All-American in general is absolutely not out of the question. First team, second team, third team. Ryan Nembhard can clearly put himself in that position. And the best case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is, despite his size, he has some NBA draft buzz. And it's not just because he has the same last name as his brother, who, of course, has been a very productive NBA player. We'll talk more about that to close out the show. Worst case scenario for Ryan Nembhard, the shooting woes persist. Guy who's he's only shot above 33% from three once for a full season in his career, and that becomes true. He finishes the season under 33%. You don't know game in and game out whether it's going to be a Ryan Nembhard who hits his first three-pointers and is just on fire all game and really stretching the defense, or he misses a few, loses his confidence, and is no longer able to effectively run the pick and roll. They have to run that condensed pick and roll at the free throw line, or Nolan Hickman's running the pick and roll, or they're abandoning it and they're going to different offensive sets because you just don't know which version of Ryan Nembhard, the outside shooter, you're getting. The worst case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that he struggles to connect with his new teammates, that he and Caleb Battle don't play as well off each other as a lot of people are expecting them to, because of different styles, because neither of them are lights out three-point shooters, that maybe he doesn't adjust well to Michael Ajayi and the role that he's going to fill on this team. Ryan Nembhard's the straw that stirs the drink. He needs to be able to adjust to every one of his teammates. Just like the new teammates need to adjust to everybody, so does Ryan Nembhard. And in a worst case scenario, he's not able to do that right away. I don't think you're looking at a full season of like dysfunction among those three players. That would be even below the worst case standards. But like the struggles we saw last year early in the season, maybe on a smaller scale, persist with teammates like Battle and Ajayi, and it creates some kind of ugly games or ugly performances where you're like, what happened in that game? And it's like seemed like there was something off with Nembhard and some of his teammates. Worst case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that defensively he's still an issue, and that could be a problem in a backcourt with Nolan Hickman and Caleb Battle. Nolan Hickman's a tenacious, hardworking defender, but he's not very big. Ryan Nembhard himself is not very big either. He's only 6 feet tall. Caleb Battle hasn't ever really been billed as a particularly great defender. So in a worst case scenario, Gonzaga's defense at certain times is cause for concern, potentially alarming what the defense looks like. And he's part of the problem on that side of the floor. The worst case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that inconsistency, which was a problem last year, persists and causes frustration. There is nobody that fans of a college basketball program like to throw under the bus more than the starting point guard. No matter what happens, it is almost always the starting point guard's problem. That has been true of the way Josh Perkins was treated, the way that Nolan Hickman has been treated. It's true at every other program that has a strong fan base. This is not a Gonzaga specific thing, but a worst case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is that those inconsistencies are still there and he's starting to draw the ire of the fan base. Worst case scenario for Ryan Nembhard is probably still all WCC second team, maybe honorable mentions. The absolute worst case scenario would be a shocker if he's not there in some capacity, and that there's just no NBA talk after the season. He's not discussed as a legitimate prospect in that regard. So what does Ryan Nembhard's final season actually look like? What is the realistic outcome? And what does that future look like outside of his career here in Spokane? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about Robinhood Gold, because with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost or an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our player preview episode discussing Gonzaga point guard Ryan Nembhard as he enters his final season of college basketball eligibility. We're going to talk his expected role, his expected production, and then his future outside of the Gonzaga basketball space. Frankly, there's not a lot of mystery about Ryan Nembhard's role this upcoming season. There's a lot of players who don't have a ton of mystery. Graham Ike's in that mix. Nolan Hickman's in that mix. A few other guys where we're like, yeah, we're pretty sure Ismaila Diane's not going to play a big role. Emmanuel Innocente's not going to play a big role. We're not doing a player preview on Braden Smith because he's not going to play this year as a redshirt. But with somebody like Ryan Nembhard, he's going to start. He's going to start at point guard. He's going to play 34 minutes a game. Guaranteed. I mean, it would be shocking to see his minutes per game drop significantly from last year. Gonzaga had a depth issue last year. This year, they do not. They have solved that problem. Even with Steele Venters being injured again, it hurt their depth, but the depth in the guard room is much better. You have Ryan Nembhard, you have Nolan Hickman, who's going to start at the 2. You have Dusty Stromer, you have Caleb Battle, who's going to play a ton of minutes. You have Emmanuel Innocente. Like, you have the depth to withstand having those guys play a little bit less. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think the 35.8 is probably going to come down a little bit, but for folks thinking, oh, well, maybe Nembhard and Hickman will only play like 32 each or 30 each, like, no, that's not going to be the way it goes. I guarantee you Ryan Nembhard's going to play 34 and a half, maybe 35 minutes per game on average this season. And again, he's done it every year of his career. So there's not really any reason to change that at this point, especially as his performance has increased every single season as well. Ryan Nembhard's going to have his best shooting season ever. That is my prediction. That is my expectation for him coming into the year. I think he's going to shoot 37 to 38% from 3. I don't think we're going to see a full 40%. Again, he's never been above 35.6, but we saw 42% for him for a stretch last year, a long stretch, mind you, a 22-game stretch where he shot 42% from 3. 22 games is a significant enough sample size that projecting him to shoot 40% is not crazy. It's not out of the question. I'm not quite there yet. I think it's going to be a little bit closer to 37, 38. What I am curious about is what the attempts look like. 3.1 attempts per game last year. His career high is 4 attempts per game. Does he shoot more? Does he shoot less? How does that work? It kind of depends on some of the players around him. It depends on the floor spacing. It depends on whether they're running the pick and roll offense, things like that. But I think we are going to see Nembhard shoot around 37, 38% from 3. I also think he's going to average more than 7 assists per game. He was 6.9 last year. That has improved every year of his career. I think in this, now that he's familiar with his offense, now that he's familiar with his teammates, now that the offense is kind of catered and tailored around his game. Last year, they were kind of trying to find that. This year, they don't have to do that. The players who came in are going to adjust to what is already in place, and that favors Ryan Nembhard. So something like 13 points, 7.5 assists, 37% from 3. Just throwing out numbers that I think are in the range of where I think Nembhard's performance is going to be in his final season of college basketball. I think that's enough for him to be WCC first team. I think it's enough for him to potentially be All-American third team. If you average over 7 assists per game, you should be in strong consideration for at least one of the All-American teams, especially if you average 7+ assists a game on a team that finishes, in the top 5, top 10, team that earns a top 3 seed in March. If the Zags are able to do those things and Nembhard's able to do his part, he should be in that All-American conversation. What does the future hold for Ryan Nembhard? It's kind of weird at this point, seeing a player who's only played 3 years of college basketball and knowing, oh, they're done after this year. We're finally out of the COVID eligibility time period. And so there's been a lot of confusion about some of the, like Ben Gregg seems to really trip a lot of people up because of that weird half season that he started. But Ben Gregg is entering his final season of college basketball. So is Ryan Nembhard. So is Nolan Hickman. So is Michael Ajayi. So is Caleb Battle. Although Battle's played many years, so his is a little bit wonky. So, same with Ajayi's being wonky because of the junior college route. But for Nembhard, he played 2 years at Creighton. He played 1 year at Gonzaga. And now he's going to play a second year at Gonzaga. That's it. It's a pretty normal linear progression, obviously in the transfer portal era where you don't have to sit out a year. But it's still weird to see. It just feels odd. I'm so used to seeing guys play 4 or 5, some cases 6 years of college basketball. And we're going to start to kind of phase that out now with the COVID years coming to an end. For Ryan Nembhard, the next question is what happens after his Gonzaga basketball career? And obviously that's where the conversation becomes in some ways about his brother, Andrew. Andrew, of course, phenomenal for 2 years at Gonzaga, was good at Florida as well. his production as a college basketball player doesn't look that different from Ryan's. They're different players. They're not exactly the same, but like statistically, they don't look dramatically different. And so I think some people might look at that and think, well, okay, not only did Andrew get drafted 32nd, the first pick of the second round of the NBA, or 31st, the first pick of the second round, the NBA draft, he's also been prolific in his career, was fantastic for Indiana in the playoffs last year. Looks like a legitimate star in the making for the Indiana Pacers, was great for Team Canada in the Olympics. And I think a lot of people are going to see all that and be like, well, like Ryan's putting up similar numbers for, two really good programs. It's going to be a same kind of situation. There's a tremendous difference between the two of them. And it's 5 inches of height. And that's what it is. Andrew Nembhard's 6'5", Ryan Nembhard's 6 foot. That's enough right there to dramatically alter the upside for Ryan Nembhard as an NBA player. He's listed at 6 foot, 180 pounds on Gonzaga's website. I don't know if that's generous or not, but if that is the most generous way Gonzaga is going to list him, that is not a great sign for NBA teams who value size and length more than they ever have in the history of basketball. It is so vital. 6 foot players just are not getting that kind of attention in the modern NBA game. They're not. And I think that that's enough, that even though Ryan is productive, and even if he has the best season of his career and he's distributing the basketball well, first of all, if you're going to make it in the NBA as somebody who is 6 foot or shorter, the only way to do it right now is to be a lights out shooter. Ryan Nembhard's not that. He's not that. And if he goes out and has the best shooting season of his career by a massive amount, if he does something outside of the realm of what I consider the best case scenario, and he shoots 45% from three this year, teams are still going to look at that. They're still going to look at his career 3-point shooting numbers. They're still going to look at his age. They're still going to look at his height and be like, I just don't know if we see a legitimate path for this guy to be an NBA player. And that's if he shoots 45% from three this year. If he shoots 37% like I'm projecting, he'll get looks. He'll get invited to Summer League. Hopefully he gets invited to Summer League with the Indiana Pacers and gets to play with his brother. Gets to be on the team while his brother watches. I don't think Andrew's going to be playing Summer League basketball next year, but that would be really cool. That would be a great opportunity for him. But frankly, I'd be very surprised if Ryan Nembhard got selected in the upcoming NBA draft. There haven't been that many preseason mock drafts and big boards out yet, but there have been a few. ESPN recently released their top 100 draft prospects for this upcoming season. There was a Gonzaga player on it. It was Michael Ajayi. He was at 41. That's it. Ryan Nembhard not on there. And I get it. And it's unfortunate because I think he's got the talent to be somebody who could play at that level. He's fast enough. He's a good enough passer that I think he's, like, talent-wise, he's as good as guards in the NBA. There are backup point guards in the NBA, or third string guards particularly, that he's as good at. But the size is going to probably prevent him from getting a serious look. Maybe he'll be a G League guy who gets some opportunities to play in the preseason. Maybe some injuries allow him to play a few games in the NBA, do like a Joel Ayayi or Zach Norvell, where you play 8 to 10 NBA games and then end up playing overseas or sticking around in the G League. And then that kind of ends up being the career. So it's unfortunate. I think that's probably the best outcome for Nembhard, is getting a sniff in the NBA, but not getting a super serious look. Because again, as we've said with other players in different situations, like Drew Timme and Nolan Hickman to that extent, like you have to match the modern game. Drew Timme would have been an NBA player 25 years ago. It's possible Ryan Nembhard would have too, because they didn't care as much about the size. But now in the modern game, I just don't see it working out for him. And it's unfortunate because it's not because of anything he can really control. Obviously, being a better shooter would help. But again, I'm not sure that it helps enough to get him into the league, at least not to stick in the league. It's going to wrap it up for me today and for this week, folks. Thank you so much for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. Huge shout out to the everyday listeners. Shout out to those of you hanging out with us on the Discord channel as well. Always fun to get the opportunities to chat with you all, folks. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back next week. We'll get you recapped on FanFest, how that goes for the women's team. We'll continue the player preview series as we get through every player on Gonzaga's roster. We'll also keep talking about the Gonzaga's move to the Pac-12, the latest rumors, the updates in that regard, what it means for Gonzaga. All that coming up next week. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.